Alright, so Katie Porter, the House representative from California, recently announced that she is in fact going to be challenging for that 2024 Senate seat that is currently being vacated by California Senator Dianne Feinstein, who is at this point approximately a billion years old. Now, I have been covering Katie Porter on this channel for a while now. Usually it has something to do with one of her famous whiteboard takedowns within these House committee hearings where, she'll confront some corporate executive ghoul directly to their face and challenge corporate America in ways that I think she is pretty adept at doing. But as we're going to get to in this video, she clearly has some flaws within her foreign policy agenda. Okay, so I wanted to cover this story not just because of Katie Porter and her ongoing California Senate run, but also just because of some of the ongoing events that we have seen unfold over in Israel and Palestine over the last couple of weeks that I unfortunately have not really had a chance to get into. So here to start us off from Mondaweiss, they say Representative Katie Porter pushed for Dem legislation or Dem delegation to meet with Netanyahu, says she was extremely impressed. Okay, extremely impressed by Benjamin Netanyahu, okay, the current Prime Minister of Israel, the extreme far-right Prime Minister of Israel, who is currently, aligning himself and appointing members of his own cabinet that are in high-up positions within the Israeli government that have direct affiliations with, literal terrorists. So let's hear what she has to say about the current status of the apartheid government of Israel and this absolute demon, Benjamin Netanyahu. So they start off here saying that last month, 15 Democratic House members traveled to Israel as part of a delegation sponsored by the liberal Zionist group J Street, and according to a new Jewish Insider interview with Representative Katie Porter, the Congresswoman pushed the delegation to meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and was extremely impressed with his willingness to grapple with us on some of the toughest issues that Israel's facing. Okay, so what are the details about this? What exactly do you think that Israel's issues are that they're facing, and how exactly would you like to approach resolving some of those supposed issues? So they say in January, Porter launched a Senate campaign to succeed Senator Dianne Feinstein in 2024. Fellow California Representatives Adam Schiff and Barbara Lee are also running for the seat. Now listen, Adam Schiff is not going to have even mildly better takes when it comes to our relationship with Israel, but Barbara Lee, on the other hand, who does tend to have moderately better foreign policy takes in the past, at least historically, may have something better to say about our relationship with Israel and Palestine. But listen, within this race that is ongoing within California, as far as the cast that we currently have, I don't think we're going to be getting anybody who is aggressively out there calling out the war crimes, the apartheid that is the government of Israel, right? But that's the current cast that we have right now. So they continue here with a quote directly from Katie Porter. She says, "I was extremely impressed with his willingness to kind of grapple with us at some of the toughest issues that Israel's facing. Everything from judicial reform, which is quite a way to put some of the recent actions that Benjamin Netanyahu's government has been taking in Israel, but we'll circle back around to that here in a second." But she says she's very impressed with his ability to tackle issues such as judicial reform, an issue that we're having questions and discussions about right now within the Democratic Party here in the United States, to issues about the West Bank and about settlements, said the Congresswoman. Okay, so again, pretty interesting topics that you're talking about, about settlements, especially in the West Bank, these brazenly, internationally recognized illegal settlements that Israel continues to build within Palestinian territories, right? What kind of conversation were you having with the Benjamin Netanyahu government about these settlements? Because believe it or not, Benjamin Netanyahu, his ideological framework, his policy positions are not exactly, about restraining the ongoing, expansion of these illegal settlements, to say the least. I mean, he's basically running full speed in the opposite direction of that and trying to expand Israel's presence within Palestinian territory to the maximum extent possible. But apparently they were having some sort of productive discussions behind the scenes, I guess. But she continues saying, "We emphasized, and I think Netanyahu emphasized back, that there's a long-term project here, which is to have a vibrant, secure, Jewish, democratic state of Israel. Okay, so I want to hammer home something here that I've talked about many times before, but in order for you to talk about this in an honest way, you have to describe what you're actually talking about here. When you say you want a Jewish, democratic state of Israel, okay, Jewish people are not the only people who live within what Israel would call Israeli territories, okay? You have other people who don't identify as Jewish, who may be Arab, who may be any other, number of different classifications, okay? They live in these regions as well. When you're talking about creating a Jewish democratic state, what you're describing is an ethno-state, okay? That's what you're talking about. An ethno-state that requires the expulsion of an entire different group of people cannot, by definition, be a democracy, okay? In the same way that an apartheid state cannot, by definition, be a democracy, okay? It would be the same thing as saying that, towards the earlier stages of the United States of America, during the era of our founding fathers, that we were somehow a democracy when it was only like wealthy, white, land-owning men who were able to participate in that democracy. It's like, okay, maybe for that specific subclass of people, that's a democracy for them, but it's not a democracy in the typical sense that we would use that word, right? But she continues, saying that in order to do that, in order to create this Jewish democratic state of Israel, in order to do that, there needs to be opportunities for the Palestinian people to have their own elected government and governance and land. Okay, she continued, how we get there is unclear right now. I don't know, maybe you could start with Israel dropping their apartheid policies, dropping the ongoing ethnic cleansing, dropping the ongoing expansion of illegal settlements into Palestinian territories. Maybe that would be a starting position. I don't know. But I mean, again, it's kind of a joke here to say that Palestinians deserve their own government, their own governance, their own land, as Israel is continuing to violate their own territorial sovereignty. Okay, these are not mixing here. And if what you're referring to here is a partition of some sort of a two-state solution, that is not possible given the current policies of the government of Israel. The government of Israel does not want a two-state solution, okay? The government of Israel wants Palestinians out of what they consider to be their so-called, rightful claims to the entirety of, Palestinian lands. That's what they're talking about here. There is no two-state solution. The only actual ending solution that you could possibly have in this kind of a circumstance would be a one-state actual democratic government representation within this region, okay? You cannot have a two-state solution. It is logistically impossible given the ongoing expansion of these illegal Jewish settlements within Palestinian territories. It is not possible. You have completely fragmented populations of Palestinians. You have millions of Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip, millions of Palestinians living in the West Bank, and all of these different fragmented communities that are continuing to be splintered by these ongoing expanding Israeli settlements. It's not possible anymore. So to pretend as if it is, and then to continue perpetuating the status quo of what the Israeli government is doing to the Palestinians, that is a complete fucking joke at face value. But she continues. She says, we shouldn't let the impediments to that progress prompt us to give up on the goal, given its incredible importance to Israel and to the region and to the United States. Okay, again, pretending as if the United States or Israel actually want some sort of a fair two-state solution in this equation. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. But they say Porter has emerged as a progressive favorite in recent years as a result of her fierce advocacy for consumer protection and forthright questioning of right-wing officials during congressional hearings. Yes, I'll give her credit for that. When she continues to do that, I will continue to give her credit for that, but I'm also going to call out some of her bullshit when it comes to matters like this issue. But they say she's not known for her foreign policy positions, you don't say, and admits to Castle that she's new to the issue. Okay, I mean, come on, man. She's new to the issue, but she certainly doesn't typically vote with the relatively small group of House members who champion the rights of Palestinians. She's not a co-sponsor of Representative Betty McCarthy columns, bill aimed at impeding Israel's detention of Palestinian children. Okay, great, I guess. She says she voted in favor of an additional $1 billion in Iron Dome funding in 2021 and backed a 2019 House resolution condemning the nonviolent BDS movement. Okay, honestly, I didn't even know that she actually voted in favor of this measure, which is an absolute insanity. I mean, condemning the BDS movement, we're talking about boycott, divestment, sanction. Okay, the same exact strategy that was used against the South African apartheid at the time. Okay, that's the strategy that we're talking about here. We have an ongoing Israeli apartheid, according to many people, including Noam Chomsky, who we'll get to here in a second. It is even worse than South African apartheid, given the current state of what is going on in response to Palestinians within Israeli territories. So, that's the current status of what we're talking about, what's going on with Israeli apartheid in Israel right now. And yet she's coming out and saying, no, I'm not in favor of boycott, divestment, sanction, the same strategy that has been used against apartheid governments in the past. But they say she's also praised the tightening of sanctions on Iran. And keep in mind, I mean, this is coming at a time, I didn't get to cover this on my channel, but, this is coming at a time where we just had recent reporting coming out of The Intercept, Ken Klippenstein, actually, who's a great, investigative journalist and all of that. But he was basically reporting that the U.S. government had created secret plans for war with Israel, or for war with Iran, basically allowing our foreign policy to be dictated in large part by the Israeli government. Okay, but we're going to circle back around to exactly what the Israeli government has been doing recently and why this is such a catastrophic, situation that we have found ourselves in, especially within the Middle East. But they finish off here saying that Porter also told Castle that she has reached out to a local AIPAC official for Middle East analysis. She's reaching out to AIPAC for Middle East analysis. Okay, I don't know if I could even theoretically come up with a worse organization to ask for advice when it comes to foreign policy. Okay, we are talking about an organization that is purely representative of whatever the fuck the government of Israel wants to do at any given time. Okay, absolutely atrocious decision making here. But we're gonna finish off there with this article because honestly, I can't take any more of that. Hear from Monda Weiss breaking down exactly what Katie Porter has been doing in response to her campaign. Now I want to move on to a little bit more in terms of what has actually been going on within Israel and Palestinian territories just recently. So here from Vox, they wrote a great article that was breaking down this absolute, violent attack that was coming from Israeli settlers within this Palestinian village called Huwara. So here from Vox, they say how the Israeli settler rampage was emboldened by the new far-right government within Israel. Okay, keep in mind, talking about the same government here that Katie Porter was just praising, was just saying that she was impressed by or excited by, I guess. So they say here from Vox, in the occupied West Bank town of Huwara on Sunday, hundreds of Israeli settlers torched the homes of 30 Palestinians and lit about 100 cars on fire. The settlers attacked Huwara and the villages nearby hours after a Palestinian man killed 2 Israeli brothers from the neighboring Israeli settlement Har Braka. Okay, now keep in mind, again, we're talking about an Israeli settlement. Okay, we're talking about an illegal settlement here. Okay, that's what we're referencing here, right? They say the apparent retaliation injured 390 Palestinians. Okay, 390, the classic, proportionate response here from Israelis. Okay, 390 Palestinians injured, most from tear gas and smoke inhalation, and 1 Palestinian was shot dead, according to the Palestinian Red Crescent. Several prominent Palestinians and Israelis, including the opposition Labor Party leader, Merav Michaeli, likened the attack on Huwara to a pogrom. Okay, now obviously that's going to be a sensitive claim to make because you're talking about, Israel, you were talking about what is considered to be the homeland of the Jewish people. Obviously, the Jews underwent many pogroms throughout history, especially within Nazi Germany. We know all of that, but that does not exclude the fact of the matter that the current status of the Israeli government is outright fascist, okay? That is what the Israeli government is, okay? That's just the facts of the matter of what is actually being done on the ground, okay? But they continue here, saying that the violence in Huwara, escalating Israeli military raids on Palestinians, and the intensified Palestinian attacks against Israelis over the last several months reveal a new reality. The shape of the Israeli government has moved to an extreme far right, further enabling the country's most fringe elements and raising questions about whether more violence from either side can be avoided. And no, of course it can't, because listen, there's so much, coverage within the media where anytime there's any sort of like fighting that's going on between Palestinian resistance fighters and Israeli security forces or the IDF or anything, and there's always this bullshit false equivalence. Okay, the only thing you have to understand at this point is the power discrepancy between the government of Israel, which is being funded, which is being armed by the most powerful government and military on the face of the planet, the United States of America. That is what Israel's power represents. And then you have Palestinians who have for decades been dispossessed, been removed from their territories, been sent across all of these different fragmented places, been brutalized, been murdered, been bombed into oblivion. That is the power discrepancy that we're talking about here. The idea that like some ragtag group of resistance fighters, Palestinian resistance fighters, is somehow like equivalent to the Israeli military forces is absolutely deranged. There is no comparison here in any way, shape, or form. Okay, and we've seen that with previous military campaigns from the Israeli security forces and from the Israeli military previously, just in recent history. But they continue here saying that settlements or Israeli communities that are built on land in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem and that are considered illegal by the international community, okay, emphasis again on illegal by the international community, have expanded over the last 2 decades. Today, more than 685,000 Israeli settlers live there, posing a major barrier to the creation of an independent Palestinian state. This is exactly why I was saying the two-state solution is delusional at this point. It is not possible, and that is the fault of Israeli policies in terms of expanding these settlements within the West Bank territories. But they say settler violence has been surging for decades and rising in the past year. A United Nations office tracked more than 660 settler attacks on Palestinians in 2022. Though watchdogs say the number may be significantly higher, saying we don't claim to have a full picture. The executive director of the human rights group B'Tselem, which typically does great reporting surrounding Palestinian human rights violations, but they say there's just so much of it and much goes unreported because it has become so routine. Okay, again, that's another important point to mention in this kind of a circumstance. You have this massive, attack against this one Palestinian village, but that is not unique. Okay, it may be unique in terms of like very recent memory, in terms of the scale of this, the violence of this, but this is not unique in the sense of like, they just woke up one day and now they're deciding to wield institutional violence against the Palestinian people. This shit has been going on forever, but they continue saying that these tactics against Palestinians have long been protected by the army and other institutions. Okay, another good point to be making here is that these were not just some random settlers who decided to go and destroy this Palestinian village. Okay, they were actively being backed by the security forces of the government of Israel. But they say Israel's authorities failed in the investigation of 81.5% of the cases since 2005, according to the Israeli human rights organization Yesh Din, and few of the investigations resulted in indictments of the settlers. You don't say. Now, as a point of comparison there, pretty much over 99% of Palestinians who are put through some of these military court procedures are found guilty, okay? 99% of Palestinians found guilty on their charges of like terrorism for chucking a rock at some, brutal IDF soldier or something like that. 81% on the flip side of that don't go addressed on the settler side of this equation. Okay, so they continue saying what's different in 2023 is that Israeli settlers are now in the government and running the ministries. And we're going to tell you about a little bit of one of these guys, Itamar Ben-Gvir, in a second here, but they say their presence, in particular, that of the National Security Minister, again, Itamar Ben-Gvir, and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who last week gained new powers over Jewish settlers in the occupied West Bank, further emboldens an already powerful radical bloc of ultra-nationalist settlers. Okay, so they say decades of the Israel-Palestine peace process have been sputtered out and become inert. The Biden administration's persistent talk about a two-state solution sounds remarkably empty and out of touch with realities on the ground. You don't say. They say, quote, even in the midst of the worst violence of the Second Intifada, there was a political horizon that was to be had somewhere off to the distance, said El-Gindi, who previously advised the Palestinian leadership in negotiations. And he says you could point to constituencies in Israel and on the Palestinian side everywhere that were committed to that two-state vision. Now that pretense is gone. Okay, so they say And when there is settler violence, Palestinians have little legal recourse. It is difficult and rare for institutions within Israel and the occupied territory to hold perpetrators of settler violence accountable. Not only do they not hold them accountable, okay, they are actively supporting them. They stand by and watch. They give them defensive support, okay? They will crack down on any Palestinians who are defending their villages, their communities, their people from these ongoing settler attacks. But they say just 8 settlers who were arrested for Sunday's rampage. Only 8 settlers were arrested for destroying a Palestinian village. 8 people arrested for Sunday's rampage. For example, 5 were released and 3 are under house arrest, according to Israeli police. Okay, so real accountability that we have going on here within the government of Israel. They say the United States has supported Israel in blocking United Nations Security Council resolutions and Palestinian attempts to take Israel to the International Criminal Court. And of course we did, because this is our ally in the region. We want them to be able to do whatever they can do in order to further our own geopolitical aims in the region against some of our political adversaries, especially a country like Iran. Okay, so that is our goal in this equation that we're talking about here. Of course, the United States, who under the Bush administration, just as a reminder, literally signed a piece of legislation that said, it was called the Hague Invasion Act. It basically said if any American soldier or general or politician is if they attempt to hold them accountable for their war crimes within the International Criminal Court, we signed this bill that said we reserve the right to basically invade the Hague and retrieve our personnel from those ongoing court proceedings. So that's the United States for you. And of course, we're going to extend that same gratuity here to the government of Israel. But they say the violence against Palestinians more broadly across the West Bank is accelerating as the Israeli government is also staging more intensive raids, including one near Nablus on February 22nd, where 11 Palestinians died and over 100 were wounded. The Israeli military has responded with near nightly raids on suspected militant cells in the West Bank. Many of the cases involving security forces spark serious concerns of excessive use of force and arbitrary killings, said the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights. Again, not surprising in the slightest here, but they say at the same time, the extreme right government of Netanyahu, which took office in January, is pursuing an unprecedented attack on the Israeli judiciary in an attempt to hollow out its independence. So I covered this on this channel previously, where we talked about thousands of Israelis who have been taking to the streets to protest against these judicial reforms, as they point out here, saying that tens of thousands of protesters have been demonstrating against what many experts view as a judicial coup attempt. The president of the Israeli government, trampling on the rule of law in the occupied territories for decades, has created the conditions for the same to happen to the rights of Israeli Jews. Okay, so it seems like there are a lot of Israeli citizens who typically wouldn't be standing up for Palestinian human rights, but are now seeing a lot of the actions, the fascist actions that the government under Benjamin Netanyahu has been taking, and they're starting to take to the streets to protest this because they view it as a threat against democracy. Again, you would love to see it in response to standing up for Palestinian human rights, but at least there are some people who are taking to the streets to protest this government in whatever shape or form that it may take. But a little bit more information in terms of this guy Itamar Ben-Gvir, the guy who was basically in charge of Israel's security forces, their police forces essentially. So just a little bit more on this guy Itamar Ben-Gvir. Okay, so they say here, during these protests that were taking place, you had a violent crackdown by the Israeli police and stuff. And so this is his response, right? They say, the far-right national security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, said that police had been very patient and had barriers and stones thrown at them. Okay, so you threw some stones, so you chose to absolutely go out there and just crack some skulls. They say he backed the measures being used, saying that the force must use all the means at its disposal to maintain public order and the daily routine of Israeli citizens. Okay, what he's talking about here is absolutely brutalizing Israeli protesters who are standing up against the actions of this government, and he's portraying it as if they are maintaining public order. You are not the order, you are the chaos, okay? This is not a reasonable interpretation of how these events have been unfolding. But they say Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also wrote on Twitter, the right to protest is not the right to anarchy. And in Parliament, which is in Jerusalem, members of the opposition boycotted a vote by the Constitution, Justice and Law Committee, as it gave initial approval to more proposals in the judicial reforms plan. They say changes to the justice system are a cornerstone of the policy of Israel's new nationalist religious coalition led by Mr. Netanyahu. They say they aim to give the elected government decisive influence over over the choice of judges and limit the ability of the Supreme Court to rule against the executive or strike down the legislation. So they are basically trying to absorb a lot of the power of the judicial branch within the government of Israel. And of course, critics are saying that this endangers the political system of checks and balances, given that Israel has no constitution and only one parliamentary chamber that is controlled by the ruling coalition. So essentially, it looks like this is a massive power grab by Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, and this is again the same government that Katie Porter decided that she was super impressed by, I guess. Okay, whatever the fuck that means. I guess if overreaching in your power, trying to make yourself a dictator, that's somehow impressive, or continuing with just absolutely incredible amounts of violence against the Palestinians. I guess that may be, somehow inspirational, I guess, to some people. But, a little bit more on this guy, Itamar Ben-Gvir, because I think this is a perfect example of the current state of the government of Israel. Because if this guy is in a high up position of power, let alone being the guy who is going to be, leading the charge in terms of the Israeli police and national security forces, then this is pretty much, how you can judge the direction of where this country is going. So they say here from the AP, extremist politician Itamar Ben-Gvir, who has a long record of anti-Arab rhetoric and stunts, will become Israel's next Minister of National Security, according to the first of what are expected to be several coalition deals struck by Benjamin Netanyahu. So they say Ben-Gvir is the disciple of a racist rabbi, Meir Kahane, who was banned from parliament and whose Koch party was branded a terrorist group by the United States before he was assassinated in New York in 1990. And ahead of Israel's November 1st election, Ben-Gvir grabbed headlines for his anti-Palestinian speeches and stunts, including brandishing a pistol and encouraging police to open fire on Palestinian stone throwers in a tense Jerusalem neighborhood. Okay, so just massacre, mow down Palestinian kids who are throwing rocks in self-defense as their communities are being absolutely decimated by Israeli settlers. That's who Ben-Gvir is, okay? So they say before becoming a lawyer and entering politics, he was convicted of offenses that including inciting racism and supporting a terrorist organization. Great guy, okay? Just a great guy here. In his new role, he would be in charge of the police, among other things, enabling him to implement some of the hardline policies against the Palestinians he has advocated for years. And as part of the coalition deal, the current Ministry of Internal Security would be renamed Ministry of National Security and would be given expanded powers. Okay, great stuff here, okay? And as the head of the ministry, Ben-Gvir would oversee the police and paramilitary border police who operate alongside Israeli soldiers in Palestinian population centers. Okay, so that's the current status of the Israeli government. You have an extreme far-right coalition that is currently in power. They are trying to entrench themselves in power by attacking any, supposed check, including the Israeli judicial branch, okay, to consolidate their power around Benjamin Netanyahu and this far-right coalition. That is the current status of the domestic politics within Israel. They are cracking down on protesters who are trying to stand up for whatever semblance of democracy that they think exists. And then on top of that, you have absolutely deranged, arguably straight-up terrorists who are in charge in high positions of power within the government of Israel, who are extremely in favor of expanding their illegal settlements, extremely in favor of wielding incredible amounts of violence against the Palestinian people. Okay, so this is what our country is supporting. This is what the Joe Biden administration is supporting, who has essentially been walking in full lockstep with what Trump's policy towards the government of Israel was under his administration. And now apparently we have so-called progressives like Katie Porter, who again, I typically like on most domestic issues, but we have people like Katie Porter who are trying to run for these high up positions, for example, within the California Senate, who are also in favor of somewhat maintaining the status quo when it comes to our religion or our relationship with the government of Israel. Okay, so this is why I am in favor of boycott, divestment, sanction, right? This is why I'm in favor of actually wielding the power that the United States government does have over the government of Israel in order to force them to end their apartheid, to end their ongoing ethnic cleansing, to end their ongoing expansion of illegal settlements into the West Bank, to end their ongoing war crimes that are constantly being committed against, the Palestinian people within the Gaza Strip, which I think is rightfully referred to as the world's largest open-air prison. And so, this is our relationship within this country. Now, to keep this in mind, as we have these ongoing discussions about Ukraine, right? Joe Biden, his administration, many liberals, many conservatives as well, want to come out and say, we are supporting Ukrainians because we believe that they deserve the right to protect their territorial sovereignty. Okay, that may be true. Sure, if you believe that, whatever you want to say, right? But contrast that narrative with the narrative of what is going on in Israel, right? Because when it comes to Palestinian sovereignty, when it comes to them defending their ability to, defend their communities, defend their people, defend their land, right? Then suddenly they're called terrorists in that equation, okay? So it's like a complete flip-flop. It's a complete double standard. It's not tracking in any consistent way whatsoever. And again, that's just a lesson in how U.S. foreign policy works. If you happen to be an ally who is serving our agenda, we don't care what the current status of your government is. We don't care how violent or oppressive you are. We will help you. We will fund you. We will support you. We will arm you. We will sell you weapons, etc. That is how this works, okay? And when you're somebody who happens to be opposed to the geopolitical agenda of the United States, the State Department, our intelligence agencies, etc., then you will be absolutely crushed, or at the bare minimum, at least overlooked, as the Palestinian people have been for decades now within this country. So with that being said, I want to just leave you guys off with this clip here from Noam Chomsky, who I think puts it better than I ever could.
It's worse than apartheid. I've never called it apartheid because it's worse than apartheid. South Africa depended on its black population. 85% of the population. They were the workforce. They needed them. And South Africa tried actually to get the Bantustans to be recognized, try to make them look viable. Israel doesn't do that with the Palestinians in the occupied territories. Just wants to get rid of them.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying